Hello, this is the recording for Get Out and Joker. So, as mentioned in the last one, each area, they could ask you questions on mise-en-scène, they could ask you on context, etc. I went over that in the last video. But the specialist area for these two films is spectatorship and ideology. So there are two things that you need to focus on, okay? So what is spectatorship? So, how the audience aligns with the character, how the director may have allowed this to happen, anything to do with the spectator and how they react to the film, okay? Ideology is the potential messages embedded in the film that try to influence you to believe something, or just simply a displaying of a point of view, okay? So you can also view films through a particular ideological lens, okay? So that's what I'm going to focus on today with ideology. Now, ideology in Get Out, the one I teach my class is the use of political ideology, which is wokeism. Now, when you talk about this in the exam, you need to be quite explicit with saying this is about political ideology, and that ideology would be wokeism, okay? There are several things that you could have been taught for Get Out. Obviously, there's things like race theory and like discussing the ideas of race that are presented in the film and so on. But I say political ideology, wokeism, because you can talk about those elements within the idea of wokeism, okay? So this connects to being woken to the prejudice apparent in society. Peele's intentions were to display the poor treatment received by Black Americans in both social situations and legal. So police, the casual middle-class racism, even the fetishization of Black characters, yeah? So how is that presented in the film? Now, I won't show you this, obviously, because the video will probably get removed and I can't exactly go through it. But the scene in the party is quite important because there's a lot of symbolism that goes all the way through. For example, the use of black is a significant color in the film. You've got black cars being piloted by white characters, which links to the idea of Chris being piloted by a white character when they go inside his mind. There's also the heavy slave iconography that's used all the way through. For example, the slave auction sort of gazebo that's outside. You've got several characters who interact with Chris either display casual middle-class racism or they fetishize him. For example, the woman that squeezes his biceps and then asks Rose, is he better? Yeah? Or are they better? Is it true? So all of these elements link to that political ideology of wokeism, of being aware of your things like microaggressions, being aware of your middle-class racism, being aware of your fetishization of skin color. Yeah? So it's a really useful area to cover with Get Out is wokeism, okay? And in a similar vein, I've gone with nihilism for Joker. Now, this is something they mention in the WJC guidelines of using nihilism, but rather than calling it a political ideology, I've gone for the idea of philosophical ideology, because you can link nihilism into the idea of incel culture, which is something that we've talked about in my class. But nihilism is the idea of feeling pessimistic about the world, as if nothing really matters. So you could link it closely to incel culture and how Arthur Fleck was taken by some as an inspirational figure, by many in that fringe movement. The film potentially glorifies his life as we're meant to align with him as a character. So if he is being nihilistic about the world, if he is struggling to get through life, what causes that nihilism? So you can talk about how society is broken down in Joker, how it all looks run down and dull in comparison to later on when Fleck dons the Joker outfit, the film becomes quite vibrant and colourful. When he stops caring, suddenly his life gets better. Does that mean nihilism is okay? Yeah. And also being fed up and upset with the idea of the rich versus the poor. So tapping into that political ideology as well of class warfare. Nihilism sort of spawns from that. So I taught mine to talk about nihilism. It also gives you a little bit of a change from just talking about politics. You can talk about this philosophical idea. So I use the subway shooting scene when I talk a little bit about nihilism, how it feels entirely hopeless, how he's getting harassed and attacked until eventually he stops caring and he starts shooting instead. So then you see his sort of remorse drain from him as he murders these men, and then goes to the bathroom in this area, locks himself in there and just dances to express himself. It's almost like freeing himself from the trappings of society because he stopped caring. Yeah. So subway shootings are really good to use. Okay. Next, in terms of spectatorship, and again, earlier on, like I mentioned, I'm not going to be able to cover absolutely everything with you. That would just be ridiculous. Okay, there are so many avenues that you could go through to analyze these films. So I'm trying to focus on one area that you could cover. Okay, so in terms of spectatorship in Get Out, the audience becomes aligned with Chris successfully due to the characterization of him, the close-ups, and the brief background flashbacks, like when he was watching the television and so on, and also the underdog mentality. The character is an underdog in this film because he is the only black character, at least the only black character that we perceive as being treated. We see them being treated poorly. We see them being taken advantage of. The other characters who work in the house could be argued to be like that, but we don't get to see them in that frame of mind until towards the end of the film. Peele was quite concerned that alignment may be lost on either a white or a black audience. So the way he put it was, he was afraid white audience members may struggle to sit next to a black audience members when watching the film, because they may be worried almost that they're almost contributing to that kind of violence against black people on screen. And in the same way, a black audience member may feel uncomfortable sitting next to a white audience member because of the content being shown as well. But Peele successfully creates a level of balance to allow the audience to connect with Chris and sort of have that level of acceptability in his actions. We watch him go from a character that's being ridiculed and questioned and people being casually racist against him, microaggressions that are coming from everywhere, until eventually it gets too much and he snaps. Normally, black violence has quite a negative connotation in film and presents black characters in a negative light. But in Get Out, Peele successfully allows us to align with him even when he's becoming incredibly violent, because we see as an audience member that his violence is justified. We see that he has gone to the point where he can no longer take that racism. He can no longer take that abuse, and he snaps. And we like that as an audience. We find it acceptable in our eyes. So, as I just mentioned then, the idea of black people using violence is widely condemned, and it adds to that idea of a dangerous racial stereotype, where it stereotypes that black people are more violent, which is obviously very much untrue. Okay. And like I said, the violence is shown in a positive light. We're cheering for Chris when he finally takes the fight to the family, because we have seen him go through all of this trouble. Okay. So like I said, Jordan Peele did this deliberately. The violence is acceptable to a white audience as well as a black, which pushes this political ideology of anti-racism as well. Okay. Now, the ending sequence is a good one to look at for aligning with Chris, because when we see the police lights towards the end, and obviously it ends up being Rod, but we don't know that initially, we fear for him because we know his interactions with the police from the beginning are quite negative, and also our context links to that, okay? Now, in terms of spectatorship, we align with Arthur Fleck due to the fantastic and precise cinematography, okay? It's beautifully shot, and it allows us to really empathize with him. We spend a lot of alone time with Arthur Fleck, and we get inside his head and we understand why he is the way he is. So we feel sorry for him, and we feel a level of pity, so we can align with his initial motivations. You could argue, however, that when he turns into Joker, we potentially align against him because of his extreme actions and his cruelty as Joker rather than Arthur. So it's a difficult balance to attain. You may still, by the end of the film, or an audience member may still, by the end of the film, support him. Maybe they are anti-rich, anti-establishment, and instead they favor the idea of the everyman rising up and fighting back. And we talked about this in my class before. At the time, there were a lot of movements that were going on, either left-wing or right-wing movements, which were pushing back against established authority. And you could say Joker is sort of a testament to that. So there's a range of tracking, close-up and medium shots to gain a sense of Arthur on an intimate level, and we are alone with him for an uncomfortable level of time. Like this sequence in the toilet, we're with him for an uncomfortable amount of time, and we have to observe him for that time, almost like we're trapped in there with him, trapped in his psyche. Okay, so if you think about Murray Smith's alignment theory, if we bond, that the crux of it is, if we bond with a character, we care about a character. So by using those camera techniques, we slowly bond with Arthur and we become emotionally connected to him. Okay, so, and also with Chris in the same way. Okay, So that is sort of some of the areas that you could cover for both spectatorship and ideology. I cannot stress enough that is one area of ideology, one area of spectatorship. There are several you could cover. Okay, so hopefully that's been useful, and I will see you soon.